Hey guys, my name is Pavle and we're on the path of art. Today we'll be going through something a little bit different than usual, and that is, it'll be more of a how-to video. So, if you've ever tried painting a portrait and make it look like the person you're painting, you'll know the struggle is real. This is no easy feat because, as humans, we have really sophisticated internal facial recognition software, so to say, that is crucial for developing social relations. Society, at the level that exists today, would be absolutely impossible without it. That's the upside of being so good at recognizing faces. The downside, however, is that it's pretty difficult to draw or paint a face of someone so that other people can instantaneously recognize them without any additional context, just by looking at your picture. This is further exacerbated by the fact that not even all photographs of us look like us. Try being really close to a phone camera. Your face gets distorted, sometimes beyond recognition. Unusual lighting scenarios are also notorious for making our facial recognition software glitch. The only light it's really evolved to work with is sunlight. Light bulbs and even fire haven't been around for long enough to truly make an impact on our DNA. Try lighting yourself or someone you know directly from below to see what I'm talking about. There's a bunch of these potential obstacles for beginners, and we aren't even going to try to get over all of them. This will inevitably fail unless you've been trained as an artist for some time, and even then it might fail from time to time. Instead, we're going to avoid them altogether, focusing only on the simplest way to paint faces, reducing our problem to its minimal requirements. This is a good general principle in painting, and something that you can apply for some of the other tasks as well. When you're just starting out, anything you add in is a potential fuck-up, because you really have no idea what you're doing. So, if your goal is to get better as fast as possible in a particular artistic task, use the approach of hiding all of your mistakes. That's what we're going to be focused on. With all that in mind, here's the exact properties of the type painting that we're going to do here, so that most of our potential big mistakes that will be a giveaway will be avoided. That way, it will be easier to convince other people that the picture we are showing them are of the person we intended the picture to be of. So, it will be a portrait study from a photo. It will be in the exact same pose and lighting as the photo. If you're painting a famous person, it's a good idea to use a very well-known photo of them, rather than an obscure one. If you're painting someone close to you, and mostly unknown to the general public, use an image of them that represents them accurately or looks like them the most. For the purposes of this video, I'll be painting Henry Cavil as The Witcher Season 2 just came out, and I can't wait to watch it. Really hope they fix that Nilfgaardian armor from Season 1, or I might get a severe case of eye cancer. But I digress. Let's pick a photo to work with and talk you through my logic of choosing a reference for a piece like this. Okay, so here we are in PureRef, and let me briefly talk you through my logic of choosing a reference for such a project. So here we have this is like a really decent photo, actually two photos. And the reason why I like this one is because it has a really clear sense of lighting direction. So the lighting is coming from his top left, and there's a clear light and dark side of the face. This is really good because this is how you get three-dimensionality for free, basically. So you just do a good job of copying that onto a canvas or a digital canvas, whatever, and your painting already looks kind of 3D. Another great thing that also adds to the same point is the pose, especially on the second photo, the right one. That's like a 3/4 profile view, and you can see, that means that you can see most of one side of his face and then very little of this side, but also see how this side of the face has a straight edge and not a really interesting silhouette. It's basically only his jawline, which is like is sharp. You can cut your fingers there. I'm sure many people would like to cut their fingers on Henry Cavill's jaw, but never mind that. The point is, look at this other side, and the silhouette of his skull is really interesting. Look at how the bones overlap and the shapes of the brow ridge and the cheekbone below and the chin. It's like rhythms on top of each other. So this is a really cool photo. The reason why I opted against it is because it's slightly overexposed for what I need here. Now we're looking for perfection, and perfection we will get. And the problem here really is that look at how much of his face is just white. And this really isn't a deal breaker necessarily, and this is still a pretty good photo. And if you find a photo like this, by all means use it. It's just that I found like 20 photos, and a lot of them are pretty good, so I don't have to settle. I can look for what I like the best. And this came pretty close, but not close enough. Now the reason why I disqualified this one over this one right away, in case it's not clear to you just from looking at it, I want to avoid any overt facial expressions. So anything that seems like a freeze frame from a movie, I don't want that in my portraits, because I want an air of timelessness. I want a feeling of it being a part of eternity rather than captured in a moment. I don't want a part of sports photography. I want my portrait to seem like this is Geralt, and this is like 10 years or 50 years of Geralt in this one painting. I don't want it to be like this is a moment of Geralt as he's trying to utter some whatever. So that's the logic behind that. Okay, so what about the other ones? So this one I really liked because of the pose and all, and like the intent in his eyes is really sharp. And I think this is really characteristic for The Witcher, because Witchers are supposed to be these almost beastly humans that transform when they fight due to the use of the potions. And I mean, I'm not going to retell the story of The Witcher. If you haven't watched it, played it, or read it by now, what are you doing with your life? Come on, man. You can do better. So, basically, the reason I disqualified this one is because his face is really small and pixelated, so we definitely want a decent resolution on our reference photos. But I really love this pose, and I'll probably use it for another character I paint, but we won't paint this Geralt. Now take a look at this. Henry Cavil is just fabulous here. This hair, oh my god. It's like almost like the shampoo commercial level type of stuff. Yeah, but that's almost too much of a resting bitch face for me. I can almost hear him saying, or something like that. And yeah, I like this one. It's pretty good because you can see there's a cool range of values here. So you have everything from very light values, like here on top of his nose, that is almost white, to very deep darks, like in his eyes. And this is really good because I want to have as much of a value range as possible on the face, because that basically gives me more range to work with to express myself. If I'm confined to, say, 2 or 3 values to make a face, there's only so many statements I can make. And sure, even so, those 2 or 3 statements can be more impactful than a bunch of statements, but I want to have the freedom. It's easier to compress this value range to, say, 2 or 3 values. I mean, Photoshop can do that for you. You just do posterize and you're done. But it's really hard to think up an unexisting anatomy on a photo. So if there's like if it's all blurred like this, figuring out where exactly is his jawbone and where exactly is this and that surface, that's really hard. That's high level. You can still do it, but like this is focused more towards the beginners, and in that case it's not really my favorite way to go. So This one is still pretty good. Compared to the last one, the value range is kind of lacking. We have the dark blacks, the deep darks, and it's almost comic book like. You can see like how sharp the edges of the shadows are, and here and here. I can see this as line art in a comic book. It would be really great. Now, there's not really a lot in terms of soft light values, which is what I wanted to make. And I don't like the way his head is cropped here. It's too movie-like, it's too screen-like. It's not a problem in and of itself, but for a portrait, I want something a little bit more portrait-like. And also not this angle. This is like a full profile almost, and well, this is actually a super easy angle to tackle if you're a beginner. And if you're a beginner, I'd recommend sticking to an angle like this. This will probably be the easiest thing. Either this, or you can paint them head on, or what the French like to call en face. Or I'm butchering it probably, but who gives a fuck? Okay, so let's go through a bunch of other photos. So this one obviously pretty cool. Very distinct light and shadow portions, but also compressed to only a few values. It kind of looks CG, looks like this is a 3D render rather than a photo. Somebody has done something with it. This one pretty cool, but we've seen more fabulous editions of Cavil's hair, or Cavil. Which one is it? I don't know. This one is good, but also not enough resolution, not enough. Now this one, I was pretty close to picking this one, because I love this face and the pose, and it's like almost en face, but it's slightly rotated clockwise, this is great for a beginner. You can basically, if you're painting digital, basically paint it fully en face, and then just you take your lasso and slightly rotate it, and it will fit perfectly. But in this case, we are yeah, I really love the shape of the shadow beneath his brow ridge, and how you can see, but very subtly, his eyes here. But the reason I opted against it is because the hair strands take up too much space from his face, and I really didn't want to focus on painting hair so much in this one, because like it'll take a lot of time painting hair, and it's something that's a story for. It's something to tackle on its own. So you don't need to have a super convincing set of hair strands to have a convincing character. Sure, it helps, and I love painting hair. It's really fun, but for the purposes of simple demonstrations, it's best avoided, as it takes a lot of time and patience. So these two, yeah, this one pretty good. Again, overexposed. Love the pose. It's really subtle. It's really close to, like, it's between 3/4 and en face, but yeah, basically it's just overexposed. That's really the only bad thing about it, and I don't want overexposed or underexposed photos. I just want perfectly exposed photos. Yeah, I gotta slurp some tea. Okay. This one, and this is like the most iconic photo of Cavil I can probably think of. Now, the reason I didn't pick this one, although I mean it was tempting to pick it, but first off, it's blurry as fuck. Second, something is gained here by this color contrast of blue and orange. And also, as I said, the lighting scenario is kind of some candle lights coming from the side, and the highlights aren't very light. It's all half dark. So this is the one I finally picked. Now this one is just perfectly exposed. There's a huge value range, so we have black here, and we have white here, and everything in between. The exposition is just perfect. We get a light side of the face versus the dark side of the face. The angle is almost perfectly head-on, but there's a slight bend to it. You can see that his neck is like left of his jaw here, and you can see some of his neck on the other side. So that's a giveaway of it being slightly to the side. But yeah, it's still pretty close to head on. Now, this might be a tricky angle if you're a beginner. I've also missed it the first time around, but the trick is to basically, it doesn't matter if you take a look at this photo and paint a good en face, nobody's gonna notice. And if you notice, make sure to notice ahead of time. So think of these things before you put any color onto a canvas. Just, try to figure out which angle is it and stuff like that, so that you can think ahead of time. And also, if you make a mistake, it's as simple as really painting over it. And I'll show you, I've done that like a bunch of times. So the good thing about painting versus drawing is that it's really hard to make a mistake, because eventually you can just paint over whatever the hell you've done. So without further ado, let me open my Photoshop and let's tackle this one together. We'll be working in black and white as it takes less time to finish, and our potential incompetence with using colors won't be a dead giveaway. If you feel confident with color, all of this still applies, but there's a whole other dimension you need to take care of. You'll be on your own for now, but I'll make sure to do some sort of guide there too. I'll be doing it digitally, as it's much easier to film, but you can follow along in traditional mediums as well. One thing I'd like to point out here is that unless you're already really proficient with a traditional medium, the only one I'd really recommend is acrylics, because they're the easiest technology to get a good grasp of. If you're using traditional medium and doing value painting, pre-mixing your values is also a pretty good idea. I'd say almost it's a must. So have a black and a white, but also have at least 3 shades of gray, and ideally more like 5 to 7 shades of gray. There's a few reasons for this. First off, when working traditionally, the color you see on your palette and what you'll end up with once it dries on the surface you're painting might not be the same thing at all. So having a pre-made set of values enables you to go in and match the values you already have on your paintings way easier. Not being able to match them when you want results in muddy values and broken dynamic range. The concept of dynamic range escaped me for a while until I started getting a bit into photography. For those of you who don't know, dynamic range refers to the fact that your vision or camera, or by analogy paintings if it's realism that you're after, can only focus on either light or dark values at a single point in time. So the 2 classic examples I'd use to explain this is if you've ever spent a large amount of time in the dark indoors on a really snowy winter. The moment you walk outside, if it's still daytime, and especially if it's like noon or something, you get blinded, and you get blinded for at least a couple of seconds. More likely you're looking at like 3 or 4 minutes of complete and utter blindness. Of course, once your eyes get accustomed to the amount of light that's shining, you start being able to first look at snow directly. Then you notice that it's not just completely white. Then you start actually seeing values there instead of just white beams of energy penetrating through your skull. An inverse example would be walking into a dark cellar without any electrical lights on, and it was day outside, and now you can't see anything. Sure, your eyes can distinguish shapes in the darkness, but it takes a little while for them to get used to it. To translate this to our pre-mixed gray paint, make a decision based on the photo you're trying to paint. If it's mostly an interplay of light halftones with a distinct shadow, or is it a subtle dance of shadows abruptly burnt away by the beams of light? In the first case, have 2 dark grays and 4 light grays. And also, don't spread the grays equally along the value scale, but press them close together. Not so close that they're almost impossible to tell apart, but close enough so that the contrast between them loses impact. This is a really good idea, as if you have 4 values in the light part of the value range, that most likely means that your focal point will be in the lights too, or mostly in the lights and then cut away by some really dark value. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to be doing is basically making some initial marks to kind of get to know my way around the portrait well. And I'm using all the big shapes and the large contrasts, so the bottom side of his nose as well as the eye sockets, the mouth. Now, important thing to note here is I'm not thinking about these in terms of facial features, and this is really important in order to not make your portraits look too cartoonish. Don't think about facial features or particular ways to draw particular facial features. So, no ideas like this is the way to paint a mouth or a nose or whatever, just making marks of the highest contrast spots. And then the second thing I've done is went in and divided light from shadow. There's a clear divide along the middle of the portrait, the left side being light and the right side being dark. Now the second thing I'm doing is you can see that I'm adding the dark spots in the light values and the light spots in the dark values. And also trying to separate those darks a bit more. So painting in some darker darks and some lighter lights. The way I'm working here is twofold. So I'm basically starting from the middle of the value range, or from the dark and light values that are pretty close together, and moving towards the extremes. Now some parts, because of the way my reference looks, I know will be of extreme value from the get-go, such as the case with his eye sockets. I know that they will be almost black in the final iteration, so I'm not really hesitant about using my dark grays there. And also the high contrast spots like the patch that differentiates his neck from the hair and things like that. So I'm pretty bold with those, but you don't have to go in with the darks right away. It just helps me orient myself on the painting. Now, the best thing to think about this is you need to have landmarks down. So you need to have an orientation in the space of portrait to be able to do it properly. And that being said, a bad portrait is much easier to fix than it is to paint a new portrait from scratch. So just basically put the marks down, try to make them not too much off of what your mark is, and but don't be afraid if you don't hit your mark on the first go. Now you can see here that what I've painted initially doesn't look like Geralt all that much, or Henry Cavil in this case. It might still pass as some sort of Geralt, but the drawing is pretty solid. It makes sense. It looks like a face, even if it's not the particular face that we're trying to portray here. And now from this point on, I can really go in and refine the shapes of his face to make it look more like him. So the important thing is to have something at first, and then from that something onwards, we try to refine it to make it match our reference more closely. Now, adding in more values and more differentiating between them further is always a good idea to add detail, but that alone won't make your painting look like what you're trying to make it look like. The important thing, the really important thing, is getting those large shapes of low contrast. So like the plane shift between his cheekbone and the front of his face, that's a really important one. The separation between light and shadow planes of the face, those are the really important things. The higher contrast stuff, the high contrast detail, like his left brow that is almost dark and then his eyelid that's like really light, those are a really cool focal point, but if you mess those up in terms of shapes, they're pretty small, and it won't do a whole lot to damage your characters. It won't do a lot to damage the character of your portrait. Now, to really match the likeness, you really have to think about those subtle differences between large shapes. So try to tackle those first, and leave details like a kind of a dessert towards the end of the painting. So I'm doing all of these kind of one after another and fine-tuning a bit, but you can see that at this point my bigger shapes, my large values are pretty much set. Take a look at the large light shapes on the dark side of his face. I really like them here, and that's what's going to make or break your painting ultimately. And from this point on, I can just add small lines. You can see here that I've added some light extremes on his chin and his nose, and a bit on his brow, but I will go in and refine these a little bit further. And now we're starting to get pretty close to what we have on the reference. Now, I've tried to make the situation a bit simpler by turning his head slightly towards us. So, because the angle is a bit odd and he's looking kind of like a three-quarter portraits away from us, we try to make him en face a bit more or head on. And by painting him like this, our drawing will be more symmetrical and it will be basically easier to get away with stuff, because this is a really slight angle and it's a good idea to round these things to a normal angle. Ideally, we would have picked an en face photo to begin with, but we didn't have one with such a good lighting, and this one really has a perfect lighting scenario for portrait painting, so that's what we decided to go with. And now here you can see that I'm trying to make his hair a bit messy. Now the values were there already, but I really do need to indicate the messiness of his hair, because you have to think of this like a story. What makes a witcher? So, you know, witchers fight a lot, therefore their hair will be messy. If you look at the guy and he has like really soft and smooth hair, your first thought wouldn't be, oh, this guy fights monsters every day. So we try to make him look a little bit ragged, and that's why the hair is an important detail. And from here on out, since we've basically matched the character the way we want, we just go in, add in a few little details, refine. You can see that these really make some regions pop, and we could do this for an eternity, but we're going to be done with it pretty soon. And here we might as well call it a day. So large shapes first, small shapes follow, and extreme values follow after the mild values. So that's the essential tips to go for it.